What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do just that is my good friend, Scott Pianowski. Scott, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, Matt. Feeling energized after a very exciting end to the NFL season and what looks like a very wide open playoffs. We're going to talk all about that today and just putting a period on the fantasy season. I do have some leagues that do use the final week, so I was engaged in a way that maybe other people weren't. But after the season, to me, it like goes by so quick for the first couple of months, and then it starts to drag maybe in that third quarter. And the way we got some just fun primetime games, that crazy Baltimore-Pittsburgh game last night, I feel like that put an extra bounce in my step. And now the playoff schedule, every game except for the Rams and Panthers has a really low spread this week. It's like, who could win? Anybody could win. It's going to be an exciting month of football ahead.
I think you said that so perfectly. Number one, it's been way too long since we've done this together, Scott. So I'm very happy that I'm jacked up that you're on the show here today. I'm also just jacked up exactly what you said about the NFL playoffs, man, because it's going to be such a fun ride. It's going to be an electric field that we're going to break down here in just a moment. Been talking about this for months over on Football 301, that it's a very tight field. Just like there's not one team that you're like, ooh, yeah, that's the team. I think there are great teams here on the playoff field, but it is a very wide open sort of situation here. And Week 18, I think, was a perfect, maybe not perfect, but it was a really delightful appetizer to get us into this playoff entree here, especially that final game of the season. I'll admit, Scott, that at one point late last night as that game was going on, I'm like, oh boy, like classic Steelers, classic Ravens. It's just kind of a little bit of an ugly game, but it got so electric at the end that it absolutely has me fired up for the NFL postseason. We are going to break down all of that here today. For the month of January, the podcast is going to be live here as we are right now, 11 a.m. Eastern on Monday morning to recap the fallout of the weeks that we just saw. Then we're also going to be live on 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays and Thursdays. More on that at the end of the show. As for this show today, here's how we're going to go. First segment, it's the first look at the playoffs. We're going to continue the conversation we were just having there. Second segment, things that actually mattered from Week 18 / some coaching news as well. And then the third segment, again, we're going to continue to talk about some things that mattered from Week 18, specifically some player performances. But without further ado, Scott, let's talk about these playoff teams here. This is the full picture here from the NFC as we're looking out right now. We're seeing the whole sort of situation here, the whole field for wild card weekend. Let's talk about the NFC first, Scott. Number 1 seed Seattle Seahawks with the win on Saturday. Bears, Eagles, Panthers, Rams, Niners, Packers. I throw those 7 teams at you. What stands out?
All season, the season started, it's like, oh, the Broncos have the best defense in football. And then Houston, got their defense cooking. And those units are really good. I mean, Houston's probably seen as a better defense than Denver right now. Why don't we accept that the Seahawks actually have the real best defense in football? They win that game on Saturday, 13-3. It felt like it was 40-3. Seattle defense suffocated San Francisco offense that had done anything it wanted all during December, right? They only punted twice, the Niners did, in December. Shanahan's doing all these things, and I'm thinking, are they the fantasy team of the year? And then they go into Seattle and can't do anything. And that game, I think, was a microcosm of who the Seahawks are, where they left a ton of points on the field. They were inefficient on offense, even though they did move the ball consistently. If they avoid mistakes, this is a franchise. I realize the players are always different, but this is a franchise that's won 10 straight home games in the playoffs. Seattle should be a hard place to play. Of course, that team has also fared very well on the road with Michael McDonald. But I think if they avoid turnovers, Seattle's going to be very difficult to beat. And the other team that I have a circle around is the Rams. So they wanted to get the taste out of their mouth after the bad loss 2 weeks ago. They kind of played with their food against Arizona for half, and then they put the hammer down. I guess Matthew Stafford's going to be the MVP. I don't understand this recency bias MVP market stuff, but Stafford, maybe part of it is an acknowledgement for his career. His stats are terrific, of course. 46 touchdowns, 7 picks. One thing I don't like about the Rams is their special teams, but their offense is very good. Their defense is very good. So I was asking people this weekend, Matt, if I would give you the NFC West, and obviously the Niners would be included in that, although they're kind of lost some steam. Their defense hasn't really stopped anybody all year, mostly because it's been injured. But if I would give you the 3 NFC West teams or the field to hoist the Lombardi in about 6 weeks, which way would you go?
I think I'd take the NFC West just because you've got three really good and three different bets there. Not to mention it's just 3 versus 4. I think a few of the teams in the other 4, you're going to raise an eyebrow at for various reasons. I think you can raise an eyebrow at these 3 NFC West teams for various reasons too. But I love what you said about the Seahawks defense to start this out. Like that to me doesn't it feel like the best unit in the NFC overall when we're talking about offenses, we're talking about defenses. I think it's the best unit. And I think what they did on Saturday was such a good example of why they're so dangerous. They did not take a single snap in base defense throughout the entire night. And that's what's so great about this unit is, the Texans are a great defense too. And, you mentioned the Broncos as well. They've had their moments. They've kind of tailed off as the season's gone on. But with the Houston Texans, like they just line up and play and they beat you up. They don't do as much disguising. They don't do as much, hey, we're going to throw nickel to your run packages. And we showed the stat earlier. They haven't allowed a run of over 12 yards this entire season. That just makes them so perfect to solve some of these modern offenses. Again, perfect example Saturday night. The Niners were white hot coming into that game. Specifically, Brock Purdy was on a complete heater, winning people fantasy football championships. They were stuffed out almost the entire evening on Saturday. So again, I'm not just saying the Seahawks here, but to your question, the fact that Seattle's in here, the fact that they have the best defense, I would take those 3 NFC West teams versus the field.
Yeah, I think I would too. Now, of course, there's going to be a collision course. Like they're going to, at some point, play each other. It's also a case of not trusting the other teams in this field. The Bears seem like the classic team. They overachieve. They outkick their Pythagorean by 2 wins. They make the playoffs. They win the division. They're not going to – they need to take a step before they are a deep playoff contender. The Eagles are the unhappiest team, the unhappiest good team in the NFL anyway. I'm sure a lot of bad teams are unhappy, but they've taken such a step back from that juggernaut. I don't think anybody was going to get in their way. Yeah, I live in the Detroit area, and people talk about, Detroit lost to Washington last year in the playoffs, and I always maintain I think Philadelphia would have stomped Detroit in the NFC Championship game if it came to it. Nobody was beating the Eagles last year, but they've taken a step back in so many different areas. I realize their defense is great, and Fangio is somebody who you always have to be afraid of, but I just don't trust their offense right now. They're not going to go deep. Carolina, they're the one team that's a heavy underdog in week 1. I think everybody expects the Rams. I know Carolina has already beaten the Rams earlier this season, but you only ambush a team once. Obviously, the Rams are a better team. They're 10-point favorites on the road. I think that's going to be a lopsided game. They're not going anywhere. The Packers are just too beaten up on defense. Defense is falling apart. They haven't won a game in a month. Jordan Love is not going to be sharp probably. I don't see a lot of upside there. And the Niners, again, a team that's been riddled on injuries. Defense, I don't see how they can offset that from multiple wins. I think San Francisco could beat anybody, but asking them to win 3 games in a row is going to be difficult. So I think it's a lot more chaotic in the AFC. In the NFC, I feel very confident, as much as you can feel confident about anything in the NFL, right? You can look silly in 10 seconds when you make predictions in this game. But, Seahawks, Rams, I think one of those teams is going to Santa Clara.
I think if we put aside the Niners, if we put aside the Eagles and the Seahawks, it's just such it's a group of really flawed defenses in the NFC. Even those 2 teams that we're talking about here, the Niners and the Rams, and the Niners. By the way, that's going to create some interesting potential shootouts in the NFC playoff field. I think we'll see at least 1, if not maybe more than 2. Really high scoring affairs in the NFC playoffs, because we've also got some really interesting offenses as well. But again, put that aside for just a second. Specifically with the Rams though, and this Panthers matchup, I'm not going to say that the Panthers are going to win this game or anything, but you're right. They have already beaten this team in Bank of America Stadium previously. And I do think the Rams, while I overall still have a lot of confidence in them, their secondary is a big problem. And that's the reason that they lost that game against the Carolina Panthers earlier this year, because Jalen Coker had that big touchdown as the X receiver on a go route. Tedero McMillan got downfield for 1 as well. That was one of Bryce Young's better passing performances of the entire season, which is obviously not a high bar. But regardless, I still think that's potentially possible. And you even look at what happened in Week 18. We'll talk about it later. Michael Wilson going crazy on this secondary as well. So there's just it goes to our conversation that for this NFC team, specifically on the defensive side of the football, there's some real flaws for all of these groups.
I'm glad you mentioned Coker, by the way. It's probably forgotten because we just had another day of football on Sunday, but I thought his touchdown catch at Tampa Bay was one of the best plays of the weekend. And he's an interesting sleeper next year. Obviously, McMillan is the number one there, the alpha, and we don't really know what Bryce Young is right now. And how much is it killing Tampa Bay that they let Canales and then Liam Cohen get out of the building in back-to-back years, and now they're kind of in a flux situation right now. And Ben, I also want to say I really enjoyed the chaotic NFC South. It was crazy division, and Carolina gets in as an 8 and 9 team. The division was ultimately decided by the two teams that couldn't make the playoffs playing on Sunday. Shuck is a week older than Trevor Lawrence. Everything about the NFC South is just crazy and stupid and silly, and I love it. And I'm going to miss the NFC South, and I think it's going to be over really quickly because the Panthers are in the first game, the Shakey's Pizza game on Saturday, and they're probably going to be down 17-0 in the first quarter.
Yeah, it's the legendary Westivus spot there for the Carolina Panthers and the Rams in this one. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and we'll talk more about that weird NFC South field. We got a lot of NFC South teams that are coming up here, but yeah, it ended in the perfect NFC South way, in that the 8-9 Panthers lose on Saturday night and then somehow still make it into the playoffs because the Falcons were able to beat Tyler Shuck and the Saints there on Sunday. So it was bizarre. It was classic. And just last thing before we get off this NFC team, I do just want to point out too, I think the Seahawks offense has gotten to a point where, do you fully trust them? I think that their defense, I have complete faith in. The offense is shown some warts here. Not I think they can get hot. I think they can go ahead and win a Super Bowl with this offense, but I'm not, and it's not even just a Sam Darnold thing. There's other issues with that passing game as well, and just the offense overall, but they're not even a team that I think is completely flawless here. Like, I could see a team that maybe it's going to be tough, but just gets the jump on the defense, and then the offense is not able to hang. There's a couple of mistakes. There's a couple of blown blocks. They can't really run the ball like they have in the last 2 weeks of the season, and I think we could see that kind of come back to earth moment for the Seahawks offense even.
I was encouraged to see their running backs get more involved in the passing game on Saturday. They got a couple of screens, I think 7 receptions in total for Walker and Charbonnet, and that's a big X factor for them, right? I mean, obviously JSN has had a wonderful season, and he's validated all of the reception perception buzz that he's always had and gone to the head of the Ohio State receiver class, although it was a wonderful comeback year for Chris Olave, and just nice to see him healthy. I know he didn't play in the final week, but they need that second pitch on offense. And if it's the consistent drumbeat of the running backs, they do different things well. And I realized fantasy managers were frustrated because you never knew which one to play. And Charbonnet had more goal line equity, but Walker was more of a home run hitter. But I was really encouraged by how creatively they used them in the passing game on Saturday. Again, it can't be your entree, but they need something other than JSN's going to get his 80 to 100 and maybe better than that against everybody. But you need something secondary. And Kupp is maybe a little bit too old to expect much from him. Shaheed has been slow to onboard with his new team, even though it's a scheme that he already knows and all that stuff. He would be a guy who they could really use if he could get going. Maybe the week off will help him get back to full health, but encouraged to see the backs catching passes on Saturday night.
No doubt. I thought that was a really nice wrinkle, and I think they'll need it more going forward if they hope to make that run to the Super Bowl. So, yeah, NFC is really interesting. Let's flip it over to the AFC here. Again, 1 through 7 here are the seeds. The Denver Broncos wasn't the prettiest game in Week 18, but they did beat the Chargers, and they go ahead and secure the number 1 seed in the AFC. Then the New England Patriots, Jacksonville Jaguars, Pittsburgh Steelers, Houston Texans, Buffalo Bills, and the aforementioned LA Chargers in the 7th seed here. So, Scott, I throw those 7 teams at you. What's your first reaction?
Here it's wide open. Here I feel like I could make a case with passion for 5 of these teams. Chargers are probably too beat up physically. Yeah. Well coached. Herbert's been terrific, but the offensive line got hurt pretty much right out of the gate this year, and they've started to lose people both sides of the ball. I don't think they're going anywhere. I think they're probably going to lose to New England, and we knew all along with the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game, somebody's going to win this division, somebody's going to win this game, and you're so right. It was a rock fight. I sent out a text to my friends, a classic Pittsburgh-Baltimore rock fight. As soon as I sent that text out, it was like a haymaker after haymaker, and it turned into a pinball game. So it's like, well-timed there. And thank you, Zay Flowers, for finally, scoring touchdowns after not doing it for 4 months. And then he has his best game of the season and basically in a fantasy irrelevant spot. So that was a little bit of a kick in the teeth. But
Scott, do you realize that he is sixth? Zay Flowers is sixth in the NFL in receiving yards. He has a 1,200 yard season. Does it feel like that to you? It did not feel like that type of year for Zay Flowers to me.
It just shows. I mean, man, he's just dynamic route runner, and he's so good at putting his foot in the ground and changing direction. He moves like a slinky out there, and he was productive no matter who the quarterback was. I mean, when Huntley was playing, Flowers was still getting yardage. The point is, he just couldn't score a touchdown. He was tackled. Adam was one of my heartbreaker picks of the year because he felt like he was a right pick, but he tackled inside the 10-yard line all year. But that wasn't the problem against Pittsburgh. But yeah, the question with him, with Flowers, is does he have the body type to ever be a 10-touchdown guy? Maybe he doesn't. And there's a lot of Baltimore things that we'll have to unpack later. But I think the Chargers and the Steelers would be massive, massive Cinderella stories if they somehow emerge in this conference. But you can make a case for everybody else. Obviously, Denver has one fewer game to play than the rest of the field. They'll be at home. I don't think anybody trusts Bo Nix. They're a team that outkicked their Pythag by 3 wins. So they were really lucky in close games. They had a lot of comeback wins. They're just a good team, not a great team, and a team with – I don't think anybody would be surprised if anybody went to Denver and beat them, but they only have to win the 2 games. The Patriots, the defense 23rd in DVOA, but it's better in EPA stats. I'm still not sure how good that unit is. Drake May's obviously been terrific. They got both of their running backs rolling in the win over Miami. Mike Vrabel has been in the playoffs before. Josh McDaniels has been in the playoffs before. So a lot to like about New England. Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence, last 8 games, 102.6 rating, 8.2 YPA. He's grown up. He's quarterback 4 in the fantasy season. I mean, he's got a case to be the best quarterback in fantasy going forward. He also has a running component. Houston's defense, I don't know if CJ Stroud's good enough. I don't know if they have enough on offense. Nico Collins took the week off, week 18, probably a smart move as they look to the playoffs. They weren't going to improve their seeding anyway. With Buffalo, it's just nobody really likes the team, but Josh Allen gives you a puncher's chance against everybody. They've really failed in the roster build with him. They've tried, right? They drafted Coleman, didn't work out. They drafted Kincaid. He's been hurt a lot. They gave money to Josh Palmer. They got basically nothing out of him. It's like, okay, Cook, Josh, save our season, right? The defense has been also hurt for a decent chunk of the year. As a Patriots fan, I'm glad the Patriots can't play the Bills until the 3rd round of the playoffs, if that, because just Josh Allen scares the heck out of me. But it's 2 through 53. The rest of the Bills roster doesn't scare me. James Cook is great, but the rest of that roster doesn't scare me. But man, Josh Allen just gives you a puncher's chance against everybody. So I think there's 5 teams that you could put a chip on and feel pretty good about. I don't think the Chargers or the Steelers have any upside, but everybody else has a story you can tell.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, essentially. But before we go any further, I would be remiss, Scott, as I mentioned, it's been a minute since you've been on the show here. I got to give you flowers for your Patriots bold prediction. I mean, that was, and I know you hate when I pat you on the back, but I'm going to do it anyways. If you've missed our Vegas prediction, obviously our prediction show, it was many months ago. Scott absolutely had me completely rolling because he was just blind Patriots homerism about how this team was going to the playoffs and Drake May and all this stuff. And it's not that I believed in Drake May and I believed in Mike Vrabel and all these guys. I've just never seen Scott in that level of like New England fandom. This is a guy that, Scott, I've worked with you for many, many years. And you've said things like, if they never win another title, I'll be happy as a fan. But, as you said in the moment, your love for Drake May, your love for Mike Vrabel and this team, propelled you to predict this magical season for them. And sure enough, it happened. I mean, I got to give you credit here, Scott, because I didn't see it coming. And it wasn't that I was laughing at you or laughing at the opinion. I was just in such a state of ecstasy because you were just letting your homer flag fly, and I loved it. But you know what? Shout out to you, buddy. It came true.
I'd like to think that was all based in, first of all, thank you for the kind words. I'd like to think all those things were based in just being rational and just, what's the NFL about? When you're going to set up your franchise, you got to get the 2 check marks. It's really simple. You get the head coach right. You got to get the quarterback right. And I thought last year,
easy to say, hard to do, but yes.
Easy to say, hard to do. Although, man, isn't it fun? Like the Bears have those 2 check marks now. The Jaguars have those 2 check marks now. The Patriots have them. And last year, Drake May, with very little help, a horrible offensive line that got turnstiled week after week. I thought, there's Drake May's showing that he is the guy. In fact, to a lesser extent, that's how I feel about Cam Ward, and hard to see him get hurt in that first quarter.
Yeah.
He had so little help in Tennessee. But if I were a Titans fan, I think like we took the right guy. I will go to battle with this guy for the next 5 years. I think something maybe New Orleans feels that way about Shock. I mean, at least he's earned the right to be the opening day starter next year. We didn't know what direction they were going in. He didn't even start opening day this year. And as I said, he's a week older than Trevor Lawrence. But so what? Just nice to know. Again, with Tennessee, I think there's some Drake May vibes with Cam Ward. But Vrabel, he constantly took Tennessee rosters that had like 8-8 talent and made them playoff teams. Sometimes he even made them like number 1 seed in the playoff teams. I realized they didn't go to the Super Bowl on his watch there, and the last season was a fall off. But there are not that many right answers at head coach, and Mike Vrabel was always one of them. And Patriots, I got to give Bob Kraft, I've criticized him for a million different things. And when they do those surveys of team infrastructure and, the facilities and everything, like Dallas always does great on this because they have the great weight room. They have the great chefs. They take care of their families and all that stuff. And the Patriots always lag in that department. I think Kraft hasn't spent money a lot of times in that area. And when you factor in the weather's bad in New England, the taxes are a little bit heavier in Massachusetts. I mean, you need something to flip the culture to make people want to come here. And what you can do with that is Mike Vrabel. That's a guy who total culture changer. And it's just nice to know most weekends, most Sundays when the Patriots play, you look at the other coach. Like I always felt this way with Belichick. Well, he has an advantage over anybody he's coaching against. Maybe with Vrabel, it's not that definitive, but against most coaches, he's going to get the check mark. Can't say it necessarily against Jim Harbaugh this week, who's a terrific football coach in his own right. But they got the 2 most important things right. Now you can start building around it. Henderson had a nice rookie season. I'd like to see a better receiver room. Although Matt Collins, if May wins the MVP, Matt Collins has to be like, I'm the kingmaker, man. Josh Allen won the MVP on my watch. Drake May won the 5 touchdowns. I was the leading touchdown guy in 2024. I don't think May's going to win. I think Stafford's going to beat him out. But anyway, I'm babbling here. It's just so nice to know the coach and head coach. I'm sorry, the head coach and the quarterback, and even McDaniel bringing him back. Right? I mean, I love
totally
anytime you can get a coach who didn't work out and bring him back to his coordinator roots. Look what Brian Flores has done in Minnesota, one of my favorite assistant coaches in the league, and I'm curious to see how he'll be treated on the head coaching carousel. I'm sad to see Minnesota go. They were absolutely just busting people up the last few weeks, and if they got anything out of the quarterback position, NFC North, of course, had everybody with a winning record this year. I think a lot of people are glad the Vikings are not in the playoffs because they would have been really dangerous. But anyway, the Patriots, those 2 big check marks, you get those 2 things right, it can make up for a lot of flaws elsewhere.
No question. And we'll see, obviously, about the stability of some of these teams. But, of course, the Bears being in the playoffs, the Patriots being in the playoffs, the Jaguars being in the playoffs is just a testament to exactly what you said. Like and obviously, the Chargers, you're 2 years back-to-back with some flawed teams because of Jim Harbaugh. And Mike McDonald, even, number 1 seed Seattle Seahawks. It doesn't always have to be this next offensive guru either. If you have just a good team, a good culture, as you mentioned. I mean, Vrabel's such a good example of this. There's some of the players have talked about it this year that he coaches them hard, he pushes them hard, but the fact that he's at the locker room, greeting everybody at the end of the game, like it feels like a team that you want to play for. We had the quote up earlier from Will Campbell, rookie left tackle, saying, I don't want to play for anybody else ever. Obviously, that's a rookie in his first season, so it's a huge testament to what this team is. And I just think overall, this AFC playoff field, even in the first week here, wild card round, and even you're looking at the betting lines right now, the Texans are a 3.5 point road favorite. The Bills are a 1.5 point road favorite, according to BetMGM. The Patriots are the only team at home that's favored right now by 3.5 points. And all those good things we said about the Patriots, I do think that defense, like, if they can't get an overwhelming pass rush on Justin Herbert, he's dangerous enough to go in your building with the weapons that he has there. If there's protection, which there probably won't be, and I do think the Chargers are the team here that I'd peg as the most vulnerable. But even in a 1-game sample, some crazy stuff could happen, and they could win this game. So I think these 3 games here, whether there's upside for some of these teams long-term to go to the Super Bowl, I'm not sure. But I do think a rock fight in Pittsburgh between the Texans and the Steelers, a really interesting game between Jacksonville and Buffalo, and then New England and the Chargers, like Justin Herbert and maybe Justin Herbert Jr. and Drake May in a much better situation right now, weirdly enough. Those are 3 super compelling games to me this weekend.
Yeah, I definitely give the Chargers a chance in this game. And as I mentioned earlier, we have 6 games this week, and 5 of them have fairly low spreads. They're competitive games where an upset wouldn't be a shock to anybody. I can't wait to see Justin Herbert next year when he actually has an offensive line that might stay healthy and can keep him upright. He's just taken so many hits. He's playing with a broken left hand because they did a lot of good things, right? They found something left in Keenan Allen. They had the step-out season for Quentin Johnston. Aronde Gadsden was a really nice tight end pick. A lot of rookie tight ends popped this year, and he was one of them, had some fantasy moments there. And if they can get Hampton to be healthy for a full season. I mean, they had such a bad run out with all their running backs got hurt. All their offensive linemen got hurt. Herbert himself took so many hits and he got hurt. And yet they're still in the playoffs. And a Harbaugh team is going to be physical. It's going to be smart. It's going to be competitive. It's not going to be an easy game for New England. And I certainly want to give the Chargers a chance. I think it'd be hard for the Chargers to win multiple games here. They were even competitive in that Denver game with essentially their backup unit. And the Broncos took a while to put them away. Denver did not score an offensive touchdown in that game. So, yeah, it's again, that's a team you mentioned, Harbaugh and Herbert. They got the coach and quarterback right. I mean, just a lot of teams you can say, D'Amico Ryans was the right guy in Houston. I don't know how I feel about C.J. Stroud. I've kind of bounced back and forth with him, but that defense is so good. Will Anderson, you remember what they did to Josh Allen like maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago? They sacked him 8 times. As you said, just coming out, this is who we are. We're not going to trick you. We're not a Seattle team where you have no idea who's coming and who isn't. With Houston, and they just beat you with their execution. It's not with their scheme necessarily, but nobody wants to play the Texans. Again, I think 5 of these teams have a chance to go deep. Now, Pittsburgh, I don't know where they go. They always make the playoffs or have a winning record, it seems like, and they usually lose in the first round. You mentioned Houston is the road favorite there. I don't know how that plays in Pittsburgh now. Last night was an interesting game. Frank Schwab was talking about it, where the team that loses is going to have a referendum on who are we, where are we going? Is this a long-term solution? But that's only been put off with Pittsburgh until they lose in the playoffs. And then all those questions are going to be asked about them too. Aaron Rodgers is 42. And I got to give him credit. As much as he frustrates me and Arthur Smith frustrates me, I thought they couldn't move the ball at all. And they were just, the moment they fell behind, they were shipwrecked. And then the last 18 minutes of that game, man, they matriculated the ball down the field every time they had it. I don't know where that came from. Maybe it's good for Rodgers to have one more day in the sun. I think it's over now. I think Houston is going to eat his lunch this weekend. But all those questions, the next week's podcast can be like, where do the Steelers go from here? Does Mike Tomlin want to be here? Did the Steelers want Mike Tomlin? As Aaron Rodgers played his last game? Those questions are all coming. They're just a week away.
I think you're probably right about that, and I kind of want to hold off on that conversation because we're obviously going to probably have that. If not this week, Scott. Excuse me, not next week, Scott. In a very short order, we'll be having that conversation about the future of the Steelers. In terms of the present, we're actually going to talk about that more on the other side of this quick break because we're going to be talking about the teams that just missed the playoffs, and obviously the Steelers were in one of those games. We'll get into that discussion right after this. All right, we're back. We're continuing our breakdown of Week 18 and what we actually learned from Week 18. Let's talk about the two teams here, Scott, that just missed the playoffs because of games in the final week of the season. That is the Baltimore Ravens and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let's start with Baltimore because we were just talking about that game in the previous segment when we were breaking down the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Ravens, 8-9 record. They ultimately lose. Some magical Lamar Jackson moments against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but there was plenty of magic on the other side with the Steelers. I will just say here real quick on the Steelers, I can't believe they got away with that. Scott, this was driving me nuts last night, and I was tweeting about it with John Ledyard, who's a fan of the team and has obviously followed them for a long time. The fact that it was a beautiful mix at the end of this game for Pittsburgh where Mike Tomlin just does not value these timeouts. He manages games in such a bizarre fashion where you're just treating these timeouts like they're burning a hole in his pocket. He's got to get rid of them. And then you've got that mixed with Aaron Rodgers' absolute determination to use every second of clock available pre-snap to do all his wizardry at the line of scrimmage. They're just chewing through clock. I was sitting there thinking there's no way they can't get away with this. Well, no timeouts. They got away with it because the Ravens missed a field goal. And ultimately, rookie Tyler Loop, I felt for him, man. That was a brutal moment. He misses the kick. Ravens go home. Steelers go to the postseason. So I had to get that off my chest because I could not. I was losing my mind on my couch last night as this was happening. And yet, ultimately, all that matters here is the Steelers are going to the playoffs. The Ravens are not. What is next for the Baltimore Ravens, Scott Pianowski?
You know, I would not be shocked if Baltimore and John Harbaugh just decided we've gone as long. They're again, much like the Steelers, they've been successful, but they haven't gone deep in a while. They obviously haven't been to the Super Bowl, despite Lamar Jackson's greatness in the last few years. This year, they won't even be in the playoffs. I wonder if Harbaugh might want to take a year off, or if the team just do something different. Coaches are not generally in professional sports meant to be long-term solutions. And if you land on one, you're lucky, and it's rare, but it's a wonder. You know, Lamar was great at the end of that game last night, but he was not the same runner this year because of multiple injuries. He obviously missed a chunk of time in the middle of the year. And then we were all talking about, okay, who's going to smash? Who's going to own the final quarter or the final third of the fantasy season? Who's going to define the fantasy playoffs? And I think we all looked at that Baltimore schedule and thought, okay, Lamar Jackson, here we go. And it never really happened. It was nice to see him have, again, those moments of Flowers popped for the 2 long touchdowns. And what a season for him. We talked about him earlier, 10.3 yards per target, which is an elite number. And this is kind of an old team. Derrick Henry, age 32 season. I don't really know why they extended Mark Andrews. I know him and Likely do different things. Likely had that wonderful catch that set up what could have been the game-winning kick, but unfortunately Loop missed. Pittsburgh's a very hard stadium to kick in. We saw Boswell miss the extra point. He's one of the best kickers in the league. I'm still shocked to see that miss. But Lamar is his late 20s now. If he doesn't have the same mobility or willingness to run, is he the same player? It's a weird inflection point for the Ravens. I'm pretty sure I picked them to go to the Super Bowl. I just felt like maybe it was their time. I wanted to pick somebody away from Kansas City. I wish I'd fully steered into a Kansas City fade. I wanted to fade them 100%. It was just so nerve-wracking with Reed, with Mahomes. Obviously, they had the season they had. But I wonder, windows don't stay open as long. You know, have the Lions missed their window? Has this Ravens team, has the Lamar Jackson window, where is that at? Generally, this is an infrastructure I want to bet on, but I think the first thing we have to figure out is is Harbaugh happy here? Are the Ravens happy with Harbaugh? Because I think there's a plausible chance that maybe something happens. We're taping this midday Monday. Nothing's come down yet. It's not like you run a guy like John Harbaugh out of the building, but I just wonder at some point if maybe he's kind of sick of what's going on here. There's been stuff out there that maybe him and Lamar don't get along that great. I don't know what's true and what isn't. I'm not in the building, but I wonder, the Ravens, to me, I see a lot of old pieces on this team. I just wonder if maybe it's time to get some new blood in here and try to get this team and this organization a little bit younger.
I think that's all really well said. You know, I was joking with the producers last night that, you know, you usually call this game a loser leaves town type of matchup between the Steelers and the Ravens. To me, it was loser announces us and the head coach are mutually parting ways later this upcoming week bowl for this matchup here. And I don't know if that's going to happen with John Harbaugh, but there's been at least some rumors about it. There's been at least talking points. You mentioned that there's been some kind of talk about Harbaugh and Lamar's relationship, and some of the insiders are starting to leak out. Well, that's a tough. Lamar's a tough guy to manage. It's not easy behind the scenes, and you kind of once that stuff gets out there, it doesn't always mean it's true, number one, but it always means that somebody's putting it out there. If the insiders are starting to say it, there's a reason for that. You also think about Harbaugh has been there since 2008. Like, I was in high school in 2008. Like, it's a long time ago. Like, and at some point, you can still be a great head coach, and he might be a great head coach for someone else. And by the way, he might still be a great head coach for the next couple of seasons for the Baltimore Ravens. I don't know, but these are the questions I think that will be asked in that building. Like, is Todd Monken, is it time for another refresh at the offensive coordinator position? Is that good for Lamar? Defense, can you bring back Zach Orr after a really humiliating end to the season, for this Ravens defense? And I know they lost Kyle Hamilton in that game, and that might have really changed everything. Collinsworth was all over that during the broadcast, and I think that's one that he's probably right about. Hamilton is that good of a defensive player, one of the, in my opinion, 5 best defensive players in the NFL. So it's just, but these are the questions that get asked when you've run into this blocking point, if you're the Baltimore Ravens, over and over again in the playoffs. And then you have this really bizarre season with Lamar's injuries, but he wasn't at his best. I think even when he came back and he was healthier, I think bottom line is, I think they do have to have a look in the mirror moment here for this team and ask some really hard questions that I certainly don't make enough money to know the answer to.
I'm glad you mentioned Kyle Hamilton. He's the Jenga piece to this defense. You take him out and it all collapses. I think if Hamilton doesn't get hurt in that game, it's probably easy to say that Baltimore wins. Do you have the nerve to draft Derrick Henry into an age 32 season? He keeps doing it, but gravity always wins. Father Time is undefeated, all that stuff. Henry's obviously had a heavy workload, although he wasn't used that heavily early in his Tennessee career. What's the state of the union on Henry?
I mean, I'll probably have him ranked inside my top 12 next year. Overall players, how could you not? I mean, he looks great. And I don't even think that offensive line was awesome this year. Obviously, the ecosystem wasn't at its best. And, maybe he was a little bit more boom bust as a player. But, man, he was at his best once again at the end of the season here. And it's hard for me to – I just think I'm going to be one of those guys that never gets it right, with Derrick Henry in terms of when the decline happens. This is a player I'd rather be a year late than a year early on, because – a lot of our colleagues, Scott, in the industry have been about 3 to 4 to maybe 5 years too early calling the Derrick Henry decline, and I certainly don't want to be among that cohort.
Just one more comment on the Ravens. I just wonder how the fantasy marketplace is going to react. It was a bad year for vanity quarterback. Josh Allen had a great year.
Yes.
And obviously has a lot of rushing equity there, but you went down with the ship on Jackson. Jaden Daniels got hurt. Just all these guys winning their leagues. Oh, yeah, I took Trevor Lawrence in whatever round. I took Drake May in whatever round. I took Matthew Stafford in whatever round. And so I think next year what's going to happen is the whole market's going to wait. And it's going to be like, wait, don't I have to take Lamar now? Don't I have to take one of the better quarterbacks now? I'm curious how much the market will push up Lawrence after the season he's had. But do you have a statement on Jackson, or just kind of where vanity quarterback is, or what you're going to do? Are you going to wait next year? Just kind of, how do you feel about the quarterback position for 2026 in fantasy?
I think having one of these elite play callers is almost just as much of an unlock from a fantasy quarterback standpoint as it is to be the elite quarterback, like a Lamar Jackson, like a Josh Allen. And I don't think Todd Monken or Joe Brady, for that matter, are bad offensive coordinators by any means, but I don't think they bring as much of an edge as guys like Cohen, as guys like Ben Johnson, and even Josh McDaniels in New England. All of those guys I think were pretty significant hits in terms of those offenses going in the right direction. I think that's something I'm going to consider when taking a quarterback next year, which might means I end up taking quarterbacks later. And in terms of Lamar himself, turns 29 years old in January here in a few days, and you just start to wonder. To me, I think if I'm the Ravens, as much as I like Zay Flowers as a player, obviously I have affinity for Rashad Bateman, who had 19 freaking catches this year. Like, that's just not good enough from an outside receiver. DeAndre Hopkins at one point, he gets that target where they're not on the same page late in that game for Baltimore, and you just had that's like one moment a game. You're like, oh right, DeAndre Hopkins is on this team for whatever reason. I think they need to put a lot more around him. Like I don't think that Lamar at this point in his career can be the sun and the moon of this team, like the sun of this team where everything orbits around, like he's what it rises and sets with him. I think they have to put more around him than they've done in previous years, because I think that's where he is as a player from a physical standpoint. I mean, he certainly had some nice electric improvisational moments in this game last night and over the course of the season. And maybe he just was never fully healthy throughout the year. I'm open to that, but he doesn't look the same. Just he gets the ball in his hands and you're peeing your pants. I think it's not quite at that level for Lamar, and maybe it will be next year, but it certainly wasn't this year.
I just want to throw one more Baltimore comment out there. I don't know what it would take for Devontae Walker to play more, but this guy was targeted 8 times this year. He caught 6 of them for 136 yards and 3 touchdowns, averaged 22.7 yards a catch. About once a month, they get this guy loose for a 40-yard catch. He was kind of like the Isaac Tesla of the AFC. With Tesla, it was more the closer stuff. He scored a bunch of touchdowns. He wasn't used that much. He somehow scored 6 touchdowns, a very limited activity. I'm curious to see what they can do with him in year 2. With Baltimore, sometimes it's just a curse of having a lot of good players. I would love to see what Likely could do if they made him an every down player, or essentially an every down player. A lot of guys, just tight ends aren't going to play 100% of the snaps most of the time. But 2 guys I'm interested to draft next year is I think their arrow has to be pointing up. With Walker, maybe Hopkins doesn't come back. With Likely, again, him and Andrews do different things well, but I don't know why they're bringing Andrews back. They've made that decision. The money's been committed. It's been spent. So that is what it is. But it's just interesting that Walker had that first touchdown in that game, and it was Likely who made the big play down for what a great throw by Lamar. What a great catch by Likely. We'd be singing hosannas to that for 20 minutes if Baltimore had won the game. But just a couple of Ravens players I'm interested, maybe when best ball season kicks in, I'd love to have them in the back end of my rosters.
Yeah, it's a good call on Tez Walker, who was a pure developmental day 3 receiver, but does have a lot of physical ability. So if that's starting to come together, maybe in year 3, certainly a player to keep in the back of your mind. Let's talk about the other team that barely missed the playoffs here. That was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who actually did win on Saturday, but their fate was sealed when the Saints lost to the Falcons. They're another team, Scott, where I actually we could take this discussion a lot of different ways that we actually don't really have time to fully unpack here, but I think this is another one that comes down to, are they going to make a change at head coach with Todd Bowles? And reportedly, I've seen people say that Bruce Arians, who's still involved in this team, like you forget about that, but he's in the front office. He's obviously pushing for his guy, Todd Bowles, to stay. I've also seen people speculate that the Glazers, who just extended Todd Bowles, would owe him, I think, $30 million if they fired him, which is something they probably don't want to do. And yet you wonder if they're just in that spot where we talked about earlier. If you don't have the play calling offensive coordinator, head coach, you're just going to be in this this is the danger of it. I think Todd Bowles is not horrendous NFL head coach by any means, but at some point you're going to strike out at that offensive coordinator spot. They hit in year 1 with Dave Canales. Year 2, Liam Cohen. They actually upgraded on Canales. The odds that you were going to do that again was 0%, and I think they've actually gotten the worst output out of the 3 from Josh Grizzard here this year. And you just wonder, are you going to get off that cycle anytime soon? Do you run it back with Grizzard? There's a lot of questions, I think, to ask about Tampa Bay as well.
Yeah, Canales was probably a B+, and Cohen probably an A. But when you're a winning team, you're not going to fire your head coach, so those guys get out of the building. Canales has been decent coach in Carolina. Obviously, we're singing all these songs for what the job Cohen has done with the Jaguars and what a fun team they are. This is an old team, though, man. I mean, Baker probably on the back 9. Godwin's going to be 30 next year. Evans is going to be 33 next year. Somebody asked us on X, and I'm curious to get your comments when I throw it back to you. What happened to Ibuka? I know there's a lot of injuries on this offense, and Bucky Irving was the only signature running back in the first 3 rounds who really didn't return value because he was hurt. But Ibuka looked like such a fantasy right answer first half of the year, and then his production came down. Crowding was an issue, but also there had to be some performance issues there. I don't know if the coaches right now. The great news is that you're never really out of it in the NFC South. I mentioned just how chaotic and goofy and wacky and screwed up that division was and how I was here for it. I also joked a lot in the last month that they should just send the Saints to the playoffs. Right now, they're the team that would have the best chance of probably being competitive against everybody else. But it's not the way the NFL works. This is not the NCAA basketball tournament. But I'm just worried that maybe Mayfield needs a certain type of person calling the plays and kind of massaging his game. And I don't know that Grissard was that right answer. Just how many times can you get that OC position right? Worried about the age of some of the pieces on offense and the identity here. The defense, of course, kind of fell apart in the middle of the season too. They'll still be in the hunt. They'll probably be in playoff contention deep into December next year because there's just nobody is built to run away with this division. Nobody's going to win 12 games next year. But I'm afraid that maybe they missed their window. It was just fun to see Baker back in the NFL and relevant. And he had the 41 touchdowns last year. We all knew that was going to regress. And then he gets off to the great start, a couple of comeback wins, but it all felt like fool's gold. And it's since collapsed. I'm just nervous. It's time to stop drafting Mike Evans. He's been good for so many years. He finally doesn't make it to 1,000 this year. Injuries played a big role in that. Godwin, for a lot of the year, looked compromised. Obviously, he missed a significant chunk of time, too. I'm just worried about the ages here. Remember Washington, the oldest team in the NFL in like 15 years, how they fell apart this season. I'm just worried that maybe the Buccaneers have a similar collapse risk for 2026.
I think they're definitely that potential risk there. There's a lot to unpack with Tampa Bay that, again, we can't really do in this space because there's a lot of questions to answer, too. Like you mentioned Mike Evans. At one point in the first half of the season, the way he was talking, I thought he might retire at the end of the year because he's 32 years old. He's obviously he's injured all the time now at this point. His contract is up with Tampa Bay this offseason. I can't imagine he plays for another team. Maybe I'm wrong about that and he wants to give it one go in, friggin' Buffalo or Kansas City or something like that. He wants to go to Baltimore. They love to get a receiver at the last on their last legs there in Baltimore. So maybe that's what he wants to do. I don't know. But to me, he seems like a Bucs lifer. But do you really want to go out on this note, missing the playoffs at 8 and 9, where it was all these injuries? I'm not sure about that. It's obviously a Mike Evans decision, but he's had a fantastic career. That's a question we need to answer because you mentioned the Ibuka thing. It was a big talking point in the last 2 weeks of the fantasy season, week 16, week 17. Oh, Jalen McMillan running more routes than Emeka Ibuka. That actually didn't happen in week 18. Ibuka ran the second most routes on the team behind Mike Evans, but big whoop. He had 1 catch for 8 yards. Chris Godwin also 1 catch for 8 yards on 16 routes. Jalen McMillan, 16 routes, 1 catch for 11 yards. It just was like there's so many. Sometimes crowding is great, but it felt like this team didn't know what to do once they actually got all of the guys back. And, Ibuka's fall off as a fantasy player directly falls off when directly lines up with Baker Mayfield's fall off. And I think Baker is a starting NFL quarterback, but we know he's streaky. We know he's a product of his environment. The environment was worse this year. And even when he started really hot, Scott, a lot of it is stuff that was going to regress anyways, whether you want look at turnover-worthy plays, stuff like that. And sometimes streaky players, they go like this week to week, up, down, up, down. Sometimes they have great months, down months. Sometimes they have like the Kirk Cousins thing, right? He would always have these awesome, Novembers or Decembers or whatever, but he would have a terrible start to the season. For Baker, it was just first half of the year, great. Back half of the year, not so great. And that obviously impacted everybody on this offense. And I don't know if that's going to change if they run it back with Grissard or, like who is the play caller that comes in and saves this team? I don't even see that in this cycle necessarily.
And remember what Bucky Irving was doing to his fantasy managers at the end of the year where he wasn't the goal line back. That was Tucker. He wasn't the receiving back. That was Rachaad White. So if you rostered Bucky Irving, you were needing him to score a 15-yard touchdown because he just wasn't going to get home any other way. And so that became three-headed monster. Yeah, we can live with 2 running backs in fantasy. When you have the third running back, it sets up chaos and kind of torpedo Irving in addition to the injuries in 25.
So it's such a great point. At one point in the offseason, certainly, although we had some skepticism about them losing Liam Cohen, but in the offseason, you look at the depth chart, it's like, man, how many pieces of this Bucs offense can I get? In the first half of the year, it's like, man, imagine when they're healthy. And then when everybody was back at the end of the year, it became a fantasy complete wasteland because you couldn't really trust anybody. And my trust level on this Tampa Bay team is pretty low right now. Again, just last point on this. I know the Panthers have made the playoffs. They've let's be honest, they fell ass backwards into the NFL postseason. However, it's still a season of progress for Carolina. For them to be 8-9 and fall into the playoffs, it's a season of a step back for Tampa Bay, even if they had made the playoffs and they were the ones that fell backwards into it. So that's just, I think, the state of the very weird NFC South right now. We mentioned some coaching stuff with these two teams. We're going to continue to talk about some coaching news updates. We're going to do that on the other side of this quick break. All right, we're back, and it is time to talk about, it's tough. Nobody likes to see anyone lose their jobs, but it happens here on Monday after the season ends. It actually began on Sunday night. The following head coaching jobs are open after today: the Raiders, the Giants, the Titans, the Browns, and the Falcons. Here's what we know so far. Scott, I'm just going to read these off, and then we can go situation by situation. We can stick on one that really stands out to you. I'll just throw it at you here. The Raiders this morning fired Pete Carroll. GM John Spytek is going to stay. According to Tom Pelissero, Tom Brady is in the Raiders facility today as he prepares to take on a bigger role in the team's football operation, along with his college teammate, who of course is general manager John Spytek. But as expected, Pete Carroll out. I think we've seen that one coming for quite some time now. It was a pretty pathetic season by the Las Vegas Raiders, and a lot of it, I think that coaching staff was just a complete disaster, and I've said that a lot on the show here. Kevin Stefanski was fired this morning by the Cleveland Browns. GM Andrew Berry is going to be staying on. That's an interesting one. Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot were both let go in Atlanta. That's just, again, one that I think we'll talk about that one in a second, but they do a full house cleaning there. There's some rumors that Matt Ryan is going to take on a pretty significant front office role there. And then two teams not making a change. The Bengals are not moving on from head coach Zach Taylor or Duke Tobin, and the Giants are sticking with general manager Joe Shane. He's going to lead the head coaching search for that team. So I throw all of that out at you, Scott. Dealer's choice. Which situation do you want to unpack here first?
Yeah, let's look at the Raiders, only because it might be the last time we talk about Pete Carroll, 74 years old. One big at USC, one big at Seattle. You had moments with the Jets and Patriots. I think Pete Carroll's a good football coach who just raises the question, should you hire somebody who's in his 70s to be a professional head coach, or even a college head coach for that matter? And Belichick has not covered himself in glory at North Carolina. It's just such a demanding job, and I don't know that anybody can succeed at that age. It's, I don't take any joy in that. This Raiders obviously have a lot of things wrong. I mean, every year they have a new quarterback. It's Carr, it's O'Connell, it's Minshew, it's Geno Smith. All those guys were wrong answers. They've had 2 playoff teams in the last 20-plus seasons, and one of those teams was shipwrecked because Derek Carr was hurt before the playoffs even started, so the team wasn't going anywhere. I don't know. This is such a great market. I mean, the Vegas fans, they were so excited just when they won that game. The stadium went nuts when Carlson nailed that kick to win that game against the Chiefs. And what maybe the final time we see Travis Kelce, they want so badly to have something to love, and the Raiders have not given them that. There's so many broken parts of this franchise, but at least I know Mark Davis doesn't want to pay another coach who isn't coaching for him, but sometimes you just have to accept that something didn't work on. The sunk cost has to be accepted. This is not the right fit. Get somebody younger. I don't know who would want this Raiders job because there's so many things they need before they're competitive again, but it's just, I think you need to try to get lucky with a young coach who's a front nine guy. I think the idea of recycling a back nine coach is probably a bad idea.
I think it was just such a weird team build because I do think the front office is interesting, but you just wonder if the front office was ever on the same page with the coaching staff because they just did not play a lot of these young guys at all this year. And that was definitely driving me crazy. It just seemed like a veteran coaching staff that wanted to just push all of the chips in with guys that they knew. There was a lot of familiarity with Geno. Obviously, they brought in Tyler Lockett at one point this season. There's some connective tissues with other guys on the roster in terms of Chip Kelly, stuff like that. But to me, it just never felt like they were on the same page with the front office. It was a bad idea. You're going to pay those contracts out. You're going to pay a lot of money if you're, Mark Davis. And obviously they got a little infusion of cash here recently as well. So they can do that. Just wipe the slate clean. As you say, get a young coaching staff in here. And I'm not going to be, because I'm like, oh my God, this Raiders team or anything like that. I think they have a lot of needs, as you mentioned, but they have a lot of cap space. They're the number 1 overall pick in the draft, so if they like Fernando Mendoza, they can just take him and let it ride there. And I think that will be pretty interesting in terms of their offseason if they can get the right play-calling offensive head coach here. I'll talk about the Falcons here real quick because there's obviously 2 big players we care about in fantasy on this roster, Drake London and Bijan Robinson, but Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot are out. It's not a very attractive job on paper because – you've got the albatross Kirk Cousins contract sitting on your roster. You don't know what Michael Penix is at this point, and he's obviously got serious injury questions. But I think it was time for them to clear house here as well. I think Raheem Morris is maybe fine as an NFL head coach. I could go either way on him, but I don't think they wanted a misaligned, head coach GM timeline. So you wipe the slate clean here. That obviously means the offensive coaching staff certainly is out. We'll see about Jeff Ulbrich, who did a good job with this defense this year. But that's a pretty significant change for 2 players in Drake London and Bijan Robinson that we are going to want to draft next year, presumably.
Yeah, you could even throw Kyle Pitts, pending free agent, but
sure,
he's an interesting guy as well. I mean, he ended up being a top 5 tight end on the strength of what he did in the second half of the year. But it's just so hard when you don't have the quarterback answer. I don't want to ever watch Kirk Cousins play again, but Michael Penix, I have no idea if he can even be an average NFL starter. And it's just such a shame because Bijan, Morris is fond of saying that he was the best player in the league. And I don't think that's an outlandish statement. I'm not sure if I would agree with it, but, and of course, Robinson, warmed the hearts of fantasy managers, basically running people to championships, not just all season, but in that final game of week 18. I'm trying to think how you can attract somebody when they have problems with it. They traded the draft pick to move up to the Rams and it didn't work out. I don't know. This team's going to go backwards next year, not forwards, because they probably have to give Penix another year, but maybe he's not the guy. I just want to see Drake London have a healthy season. He was somebody, Matt, we talked about all summer. We want to draft Drake London. Drake London could lead the NFL in targets or receptions. That was all in play. He just didn't stay healthy. He's such a dynamic, dominant guy. He has 110, 16, 50, 16. That's in Drake London's DNA. He just needs to be healthy and maybe get a better quarterback. Unfortunately, one of those things won't happen in 2026, and maybe both things won't happen. So I'm afraid this organization is going to take a step back before they take a step forward.
I think that is a very fair point, and it's definitely questionable. definitely questionable in terms of the Atlanta situation. And even for Drake London's a player I love, but he's been unlocked in this, kind of Rams offshoot offense with Zach Robinson as a move around guy. You remember he was strictly parked at the X receiver position in Arthur Smith's offense. And obviously, look, Drake London is good enough to play X receiver, but every single snap, letting it ride there, that's maybe questionable. And he was really, like I said, unlocked in this way as the move around guy. You wonder how the next offense will use him. Because that usage is so conducive to him having that number one overall wide receiver season that he could have competed for had he stayed healthy there. We're just getting news into the show, which is why this is so fun to do right now, especially live on a Monday morning, even though it's not fun for Jonathan Gannon, Cardinals head coach, has been fired this morning. There was a lot of talk that Gannon was going to be safe. I was so confused by that because this team has gone backwards. Talk about a team that already has gone backwards. To me, I think this needed a full-scale reset. The defense got worse. The offense was great for us in fantasy, but as soon as they benched Kyler Murray and went with Jacoby Brissett, they did not win another football game. So it was a lot of just, to me, a bit of a fantasy scam from the offensive side here. I think a full-scale reset was needed on the coaching staff in Arizona, and we're going to get that here.
Yeah, I mean, Gannon was 15-36 for 3 years. Just nobody's going to survive that. And Arizona was fun for fantasy. A garbage time team, they would be behind 17-0 off the bus to almost everybody. And then Brissett would somehow get cooking in the second half. Michael Wilson was a lot of fun. I like to pretend that Michael Wilson is Marvin Harrison Jr. It just makes me feel better. Helps me sleep at night. Trey McBride finally started scoring touchdowns. The thing is, Brissett is not even league average, right? It's just a lot of his being able to unlock.
He's a good
McBride
backup.
And get Wilson.
That's it.
Great backup. He should not be your starter, and he won't be anybody's starter next year. But his ability to get touchdowns out of McBride and to get this out of Wilson, it just raises a lot of Kyler Murray questions. But Arizona is certainly a team that had to start over. And I think this was a move. Again, we take no joy in this, right? These people are human beings. They have families. This is the worst day of their lives. And I want to be a human being about this, but I don't think anybody thought Jonathan Gannon was coming back next year.
No. Again, there was a lot of kind of rumors and talks, but it seemed like that to me was the right thing to do. They are going to retain GM Monty Ossenford, who I think has done a quality job here. And this will be one of the most interesting teams to talk about this offseason because Trey McBride is going to be super costly in fantasy. I'm really curious to see what people want to do with Michael Wilson versus Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, Michael Wilson is awesome. Michael Wilson, 99 yards and a touchdown in this game here in Week 18, and could have been a lot better. He had a big play called back due to an offensive line penalty. So he's a really good player. I don't think Murray's back with this team. I don't think he was going to be back with the team regardless, but super interesting team to talk about from a fantasy perspective. Last thing before we close it out, just wanted to circle back on the Kevin Stefanski firing in Cleveland. I think this is another one that you probably saw it coming, but I think he could get a head coaching job here in this cycle as well. Because, Scott, that's one thing I just want to mention. You don't look around in this cycle and see, a Ben Johnson and a Liam Cohen, like two slam dunk hires. I'm not sure who the hot head coaches are going to be this offseason.
That's a great question. Yeah, usually there's these superstar hotshot interview guys that everybody wants, and I'm not really sure who those guys are. Cleveland, in their last 12 games, they had 300 yards of offense once. You can't survive that way. Now, with Stefanski, it's like he didn't have a quarterback, right? Joe Flacco's 100 years old. Shedeur Sanders is a project. When Dylan Gabriel played, he was overmatched. Obviously, it was a team that was led by its defense and was competitive in a lot of games because Myles Garrett just had this legendary season. He's going to be Defensive Player of the Year. He set the sack record and all that stuff. But you have to wonder, is Kevin Stefanski, is he another Matt Nagy, right? Coach of the year twice, but, overall losing record, will Stefanski get another job? I could maybe see him servicing in New York with the Giants. Maybe he could do some good things with Jackson Dart. But how are you going to track somebody to Cleveland where it's like, oh, you don't have a quarterback, right? You still have Deshaun Watson on roster. He can't play. He's making all this money. That's a problem. Sanders, I loved what he did in the Tennessee game. I just wish we saw more of it against other opponents. Again, you need to show up and put up 350 yards of offense on the board most weeks, and this team couldn't do it. They couldn't even get to 300. One of the worst receiver rooms in the league. Harold Fannin was really unbelievable as a rookie. What a year for rookie tight ends. But Stefanski, I think, is a solid coach. I don't think he has an upside of some other guys. Did have a couple of playoff runs with Cleveland, and that's a miracle with this team. But you really, when you're an offensive coach and you can't move the ball like the 2025 Cleveland Browns, where I totally understand why they make this move at the end of the year.
Yeah, at some point, again, it's just time for a change. I think Stefanski may have been set up to fail at various different points as the head coach for the Cleveland Browns, but I do think I understand them making a change. Andrew Berry sticking around, I don't know. I could go either one on that one. Just last note here, you mentioned Shedeur. Sean Iyer had this stat that 18.8 QBR for Shedeur Sanders on the season. That is the single worst QBR average in Browns history among players who have started 6 or more games. So that was just the state of this offense by the end of it. It wasn't good enough, and I think Stefanski will go on and get another job. And the Browns, I'll be interested to see who they can attract because, as you mentioned, it's a very flawed job there. This was not a flawed show. This is a great show, Scott. And all of these topics we are going to have more and more time to unpack here as the weeks go on. And I'm very excited to do that here with you and everyone else on the Yahoo crew. So shout out to Scott for a great show today. Scott is going to be with us every Monday morning to recap the previous week's action in the NFL postseason and any other news that we need to hit on Wednesdays. That's going to be Justin Boone. He's going to join me to go over some of the biggest fantasy storylines for the 2025 season and how it will impact 2026 and potentially beyond for all of you dynasty managers out there. And then on Thursdays, Joel Smith is going to join the show to preview the playoff matchups. Boone and I are going to be live at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, as we will every single week. Until then, we are out.